So chat would be the right thing to do. So let me start right into it. I will do a quick introduction by myself, about the company. We will spend quite a bit on market trends and how I see e-commerce developing in that space for B2C and B2B. We'll then go into the setup on how this can be done in the small and medium-sized businesses space, and also what kind of technology enablement that might be required for that. I will also cover a little bit on working with an agency or not, to give a bit of guidelines and ideas that I see in that space. And then afterwards, we will also go into a case study and demo that I prepared. Don't be afraid on a number of slides. It's not so many as it looks like, but we'll probably spend about 60 minutes to start with. In terms of theory, I would call it, then a bit of practice with the demo and case study for like 15 minutes, and then we'll have enough time for questions afterwards. Bit of an introduction about myself. So I actually studied business information systems myself many years ago at the University of Applied Sciences, Northwestern, Switzerland. I'm now 18 years in software business with a company called Plesk and WebPros. We'll say a few words about that in a second. I have many years background in international sales, management of teams. I did more than 6 years digital marketing and built up a whole digital marketing team and the e-commerce part for our business. And we're today, I'm mostly focusing on our most strategic partnerships with Amazon, Microsoft, Google. I have a big contact network there. We have done millions of dollars of subscription business. I'm based on near Zurich and sometimes also Barcelona, but unfortunately the current travel restrictions restrict me a little bit. I'm also involved with some startups in the cloud space, software as a service, digital transformation, where I'm often active as an advisor. The same a little bit in blockchain, because that's super important, as well as e-commerce space, of course, in general. And I hope I can provide you lots of value today. Yeah, feel free to also add me in LinkedIn afterwards. WebPros is our holding company that is now powering all the most important software products that are basically covering any kind of website hosting service providers in the world. So you might not know the WebPros brand because this is pretty new. We are owned by a private equity called CVC Partners. Those of you who are from Switzerland, we're owned by the same private equity like Sunrise. We have products that you may know like Plesk or cPanel. These are our biggest install bases where we run roughly a bit more than 900,000 servers powering our software in the world, with 70 million plus websites that run on our software. Obviously, many of them are e-commerce sites. There are more than 3 million WordPress installations, hundreds of thousands of e-commerce shops. And yeah, we work with literally almost any service provider in the world, agencies, managed service providers. They're also with the hyperscale cloud providers like AWS, Google, Azure, DigitalOcean, and so on. This is just about my background. I don't want to go too much into it. Don't be afraid. There will be no sales pitch today, hopefully. So I want to try to provide as much possible value, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises and agencies that are in the e-commerce space and digital transformation. So, challenges in global commerce. I wanted to talk about something that is happening not just since the recent Corona crisis, you know. There is something that when you look at how this is changing, especially for retail companies in the small and medium-sized businesses, there is like a traditional way of how that e-commerce works, or how commerce works. So you have a small brand, you produce some products, then you have like a distributor, for example, for a specific country. If you're working internationally, it's super expensive to manage, because then on these distributors you have resellers. I think this is like the traditional way of how commerce works when you have a retail brand or any kind of product brand, and you're highly dependent on that distribution network. And sometimes it's also a bit of an unreliable value chain. And it's not really clear who in this value chain, especially distributors and resellers, are adding enough value except basically having your exclusivity agreement from your brand. And I think this is where there is a lot of change going on. You know, when you look at it on a global perspective, even before this crisis we are in right now, there was a lot of bankruptcy happening already with those brands and those companies that have actually slept during digital transformation, or they were just not ready to do it. And I think, you know, there is a lot of worldwide examples. Some of them are actually chains, especially in the retail space, where you have so many companies that went bankrupt in the last few years. It's really unbelievable. But that also opens a lot of new opportunities, maybe for new players in that market. But I think this is like a key thing happening since a long time already. One reason, of course, is probably Amazon. You know, some people call Amazon evil, other people see Amazon as an opportunity. We're going to talk about that for a minute as well today. But I think Amazon is definitely, you know, a multiple $100 billion platform, where a majority is actually third-party sellers, but they're very dominant in that market. They changed a lot in that market, and I think it's definitely one reason. It's not just because they're a platform and the big brand, it also has to do with new innovations. You know, they're going to do delivery via drones, probably not in Switzerland yet, but on the global space, they're working on that. They're even going to launch their own stores again. You know, we could think retail stores are kind of not cool anymore, but Amazon is working on that because they have the data to drive that and create an amazing customer experience. And we will talk about customer experience in a second as well, why this is such an important part. Obviously, that leads us to e-commerce in general. You know, I think e-commerce is us as a software company being in that space. We have been thinking that everyone has a website now and everyone has a store now. I think we are far away from it, and we're just getting restarted, I think, especially those who didn't do anything the last few years. And I think also for small and medium-sized businesses, there is a huge opportunity to go into e-commerce and to drive their own digital transformation, with e-commerce being a part of it. So when you look at further market trends that I'm looking at in that space, we talk about digital transformation first. You know, I mean, I'm using now from my friend Mark Peter from the University of Applied Sciences. He created a thing called the Digital Transformation Canvas. And I think that's really a good base to find out, like, what does digital transformation actually mean? Because it's a hype word, a lot of people talk about it, but I think in many cases it's a huge issue that people don't even know what is actually behind. And when I look at the canvas, the green part where I'm going mostly into today is customer centricity, or probably customer experience, as I would call it, as part of it. New technologies, important part, cloud computing, data plays into it, and especially then to change these traditional processes towards digital processes, because I still hear from examples, and I will have that in my case study as well, where people talk about ordering via fax, via telephone and such stuff. And I think that's just that has nothing to do with digital transformation. And it can be so much easier. What I will not talk so much about today is the business development, leadership culture, digital marketing. A lot of other sessions can be found about digital marketing. I will say a little bit about it, but I will briefly touch it. I will mainly go into the other fields that I've marked here as green as part of the e-commerce story. So talking about customer centricity and customer experience, I think that's something that a lot of companies, especially in the e-commerce, in the small and medium-sized space, are underestimating. It's really, really important to look at this, and I'm going to say why, in my humble opinion. You know, when you look at some references, is that even McKinsey says a lot of companies are not thinking holistically about the customer's experience. And this is really like a huge issue. This goes far beyond than just buying the product. And on top of it, the research from Google, Sean Downey, recently said that a consistent customer experience could even prevent users from leaving a brand. So it's super important that you as a brand are looking holistically at customer experience, user experience, or customer centricity, whatever you want to call it, to really make sure people are not leaving your brand because of that. Because a lot of products alone are just replaceable, but the customer experience cannot be replaced so easily. And a research firm called Walker also said by 2020, and that's what we are today, customer experience will overtake price and product as the key brand differentiator. You can see that already happening in the market, that those who are focusing on end-to-end customer experience, they can really create a differentiator on the brand level. And today's customers and those in the future, they just expect a little more. I mean, what does that mean and why I'm saying this? There is also a young generation. You know, I'm kind of almost generation Y, meaning millennials, born in 1980, but everything what comes afterwards, these young people are all grown up with digital technologies, and the generation Z or Z, as some people call it, they are digital natives. You know, they're grown up with everything. They have different expectations. Give me more value in real time. It should be really easy to buy, and it should be really easy to use. They would like to be engaged. You know, they want to have a face behind the company. They want to interact maybe through social media and other channels. And they also want that you are using your data also as a small and medium-sized business to understand their needs better. And also, I think today as a brand, you really need to earn your trust. It's not just pushing your products. I think you need to earn that people buy from you. I always take an example. If you want to become more influential in social media, from 10 posts that you're making, 9 of them should actually add value. And 1 could maybe be where you're selling something and not the other way around. This is not broadcasting, it's really adding value. And if you are able to add value to your audience, you are able to earn their trust and they will buy from you. And of course, yeah, they want you to know, they want that you know their history, so that you send maybe a happy birthday message when they have birthday, or maybe use other data that you have to actually help creating an absolutely great user experience and customer experience. And I think this is really the base of everything here before we even talk about what that means for e-commerce. So what's required to meet all those expectations? Can be not so easy, yeah? I mean, it can be lots of things, but I wanted to touch a good part of it today on how we could actually meet all those expectations. So when you then look into the e-commerce market trends specifically, I think what a lot of people still don't realize, and this is a recent graphic from eMarketer.com, what is one of the leading research firms in that space, is that even in 2020, e-commerce is actually not that big amount yet from all the retail sales that are happening. I mean, we are talking about 16%, but probably this is going up a lot, especially also with the crisis right now. But it's still not so big amount if you look at it. That means there is still a lot of upside and opportunity where you can benefit from. And I will provide you today also some ideas on how you could get there. So, as I said, e-commerce is only a smaller part of the sales today, especially in retail. And I think traditional commerce companies and small and medium-sized businesses must embrace the digital transformation. And those that are already doing it are seeing much higher conversion rates. They have easier ways to actually go international. I think international e-commerce is something that allows, and digital transformation allows you to scale much easier on a global level than it was ever able before. And because so many younger generations are used to make purchases online, we really should focus on that channel also as a small and medium-sized business. A few more trends that I would see in that market. You know, I mean, when we talk about e-commerce, often you think only about selling to private customers. Obviously, what is happening there is the whole trend about direct to consumer. I'll quickly explain that afterwards, what that means in more detail. That's basically all these brands that you already have now that are selling direct and online and eliminate a lot of middlemen. These are small brands that are doing that, but there are also new startups. You might be familiar with Casper Mattress or Emma, or you might be familiar with others, but even a company like Nike has moved a lot in that direction to actually directly go online and sell to these customers. What is a largely untapped opportunity, in my humble opinion, is the B2b E-Commerce for both wholesale as well as selling through marketplaces and creating marketplaces. This is a bit more new. When you look at Amazon, for example, they only launched about 1 year ago with their B2B offering. This is going to be a multi-trillion-dollar market, maybe even bigger than B2C. And it's going to be super interesting how this is going to shape the future of commerce through B2B e-commerce. And last but not least, I would also mention multi-channel, you know, that you are creating an amazing customer experience by combining online, maybe if you have retail and offline stores that you're having, as well as selling on Amazon, that you're tackling all these channels. I mean, I'm now not talking about selling on eBay and these platforms, because Amazon is so much bigger than everybody else that this is probably the only marketplace to mention in that multi-channel environment. Of course, there are some parts that are also shaping these trends. It's on one side voice, meaning Alexa and Siri and whomever else. It's though not fully clear yet on how this is going to work and how you are going to optimize. When I say, Alexa, please order me a chair, who is going to be on that first space when I want to order a chair over voice? It's something that should be considered, but I think it's coming over the next months and years for sure. But also is the whole topic about centralized warehouses. You know, there's many more shipping providers that are highly automated, that allow you to completely automate the logistics in a digital way that you have never had it before, for the fulfillment part, and to actually comply to new user experience requirements of next day delivery, where I would say this is a part of the trends as well. So moving forward, as I mentioned, direct to consumer, you may remember my earlier slide where I talked about this traditional value chain, that you have a brand, you're a manufacturer, maybe you have even a wholesaler, you have a distributor, you have a retailer, many layers. You don't really control the full customer experience, and it's very difficult to actually drive it through that network. And it's also super expensive because every layer takes a lot of margin out of your product, whereby that when you are using digital technologies in 2020 and beyond, you are able to do direct to consumer, maybe also direct to business, in a much easier way through these technologies to actually reach your customer or consumer in that space. And that's also something I'm going to tackle a little bit today on what you could do in that space, especially the B2B element of it as well. Obviously, when you look at technology trends influencing e-commerce, I think that's also important to consider. I think with all the scandals that we had in the big platforms that breached with data and data leaked, there is a more needs for controlled, managed private cloud environments. So things will run in the cloud, but in a more self-hosted, self-managed perspective. Obviously, related to that is security, privacy, GDPR. It's much more complicated in 2020 to do online business than it was 15 years ago. And you have to comply to a lot of rules. When you look at technologies that are provided or offered to actually run your online store and your website on all the processes, you have to make a decision at some point, and I'm going to talk about that as well, is am I going to do DIY, self-hosted, self-managed, or do I just use a cloud platform like a Shopify and others? And both has pros and cons that we're going to talk about. And besides all these things, including the cloud computing part, there is this Generation Z, what has very different expectations in terms of user experience and customer experience that we just need to comply to. So how do we get started? You know, I mean, for a lot of people, this is very overwhelming. And I really try to basically break it down on where you should get started. So before you, let's say you are running a retail store right now, or you're running multiple retail stores in a chain as a small and medium-sized business. You know, doing business online is quite different from doing business offline. And if you do it in a combination, it's going to be maybe more complicated, but there are a lot of tools and technologies out there that are less complicated than we think. But you need to, of course, have room for inventory. You need to keep track of the stock. Probably you need to be shipping your products in a 1 or 2 day delivery, because this is just the bar that Amazon has set for you. I think the biggest stores are doing that. Smaller ones have really issues with it. You have other fees that are involved. So you have maybe a credit card acceptance agreement already for your store, but you might have different shipping fees. You have different payment fees. You have different fees for technologies that you're paying on a monthly or yearly basis. It can be website hosting, domain registrations, other things. And also super important when we talked quickly about digital marketing, you know, bringing a shop online or an e-commerce system is not something that you do once and you forget. You really need to maintain it. Also from the marketing perspective, you need to create regularly content. It needs to be compliant to Google standards, that you can be found, and all these things, yeah. But I will show you today that it can be also done much easier than we think. But it's important that this is, if you decide to do it, that this is an ongoing long-term line of business or part of your business, maybe even the future core of your business, that you maintain and market your online presence. What I also really recommend is check your existing setup. You know, I have so many requests sometimes that people tell me like, oh, what should I do? And it's so complicated. But honestly, you know, I think when you're doing international business, you should, you know, often small and medium-sized businesses are also running based on personal individual companies where you are even personally reliable if there's something wrong. I'm not recommending to do that. So I think at least a limited liability company or a limited company, in German it's GmbH or AG, is probably the right way to do it, especially to also have more trust in front of your customers as well as your suppliers, and of course for the liability of your business if something goes wrong. Because if you're online, you're exposed, and be careful on what you're doing, because you can be found much quicker if you do something wrong. The same goes actually for trademarks, patents, and copyrights. You know, there is lawyers, for example, in Germany that do all day just researching online if someone is doing something wrong. And I think it's super important that you're aware, what trademark do I have, what patent do I have, in which country, and that I can actually sell. And talking about selling internationally, you know, in 2020, this is a little more complicated, but not very complicated anymore. But what you need to check is the topic about taxes. You know, when you sell only in Switzerland, that's an easy one. You probably pay value-added taxes, Mehrwertsteuer in German, or you pay income taxes, or you pay profit taxes. That's easy. But when you start selling in Germany, for example, you might be liable to pay value-added tax or Mehrwertsteuer in Germany. And then you need to be registered there and need to be aware, because a few years ago, the European Union has changed the law that the taxes do not apply where you sell from, but the taxes apply where your customer is. So super important to analyze your tax situation, especially if you try to scale your e-commerce business internationally. And payment gateways is also an important part. You know, if depending on the payment gateways, there are fees involved. Maybe your existing payment gateway or credit card acceptance agreement in your retail store is not the right one. It can be that you need a different one. And the same applies on licenses and permits. You know, there's some product that require that the data is stored in a certain place. There is products that need FINMA, FDA regulations. You know, you never know. Just be careful on the licenses and permits. Of course, you know, what I highly recommend here is that you are also, especially if you go internationally, is that you are signing up for a liability insurance. You know, this is a few hundred Swiss francs. And so this is something where you just have to do it, because then you will be really protected against a lot of issues that could arise if you didn't check your existing setup in details. Now, what I also say is you should do some market research before you go online with all your business. You know, it may require that you are actually rethinking your business model or business models. First of all, some of your competitors might be already online. And so you have maybe a different competition than when you traditionally sell through your retail store, that is basically walk-in customers or existing customers. Or it's also important, if you already have a customer list, let's say an email list, or you have some kind of a membership plan, analyze very closely on who these target customers are, because that allows you to create demographics and a persona to basically have definition of needs, values, interests, and be aware, be specific on that, because the more you are specific, the more you're able to customize your customer experience, and the more you will be able to find them online as well and use that as a base to scale. The second part is obviously industry trends. You know, don't ignore what's happening in the market, don't ignore the technologies, and look at the past and the present, but also into the future, where you see the biggest macro opportunities in your industry. And last but not least, market needs. You know, I mean, if you target the wrong customer with the wrong product, you're probably not going to be successful when you're selling online. So really analyze what is your existing niche, what are new niches, what are new generations, you know, you younger people, new demands, maybe even micro opportunities, and that will then help you to set the right base on going online and have a bigger chance to be successful there. So again, don't just copy your offline and traditional business, but think about these things up front before you go online. So as I said, often, you know, you can actually go to Google, and that's a good starting point. You can use keyword research tools, a lot of other things. I'm not going into that in detail because I mentioned I will not go too much into digital marketing. But if you just, I'm using the example of a wine shop because I'll have that as an example also in my case study. But if you just put in wines and you don't have your wine shop online, you might want to analyze what your customers are already doing, who is actually advertising for these things, and what are the cost prices, because otherwise you will have a very difficult time to compete on the market. And another thing that a lot of people ignore, in my humble opinion, is you need to develop a basic messaging and positioning framework to decide how you are different in the market for your target customers. So a very simple way to do that is use a 3-word approach. You know, I mean, this is coming from more the American way of doing marketing, but often you see 3 keywords that identify your brand. and then you have supporting arguments across these three words, plus that you have a definition of who you are and what you do, for example, in 50 words, 100 words, and 250 words. You know, when you take the wine shop as an example, you could be exclusive, could only work with high quality suppliers. You have a special selection process of suppliers, for example. Everything you do is organic, you know, that you don't have zero, that you have zero chemical components. Only certified wines, you know, not artificial organic, but real organic wines. This is just an example. And that you're a reliable company, you know, that you delivery within 2 days guaranteed. And if you, for example, want to create a subscription service for your wine shop, that you're providing discounts and you're taking care of your customers there. And in addition, you would also develop these short, long, and long messaging snapshots that you actually reuse in whatever digital property you are. Talking about that in a second. Our wine shop delivers exclusive organic wine from only high quality suppliers, reliable with 2 days shipping guaranteed. You know, this is something I just developed quickly. If you spend a few hours on it, you will find some very good ways of doing that, also in an English or in a German way. And having said that, you know, is often you need some kind of a brand guideline, because you have people helping you, you work with agencies. The key thing is, when I talk about the brand guideline, this is not an exercise where you have to pay an agency for 20 or 30,000 Swiss francs. You know, that's often a misconception where you go to an agency and the agency creates a very standard thing that is much easier to achieve in 2020 to actually create a branding guideline. So think about your mission, think about your vision and your core values, and make a little bit of a branding guideline for yourselves. Because combining that with your messaging and positioning frameworks, that's going to be super important for actually creating a brand experience. And again, no need for paying tens of thousands. You can do that also as a small business, for example. It starts with some very simple things, you know. Create a color palette, you know, not 20 colors, but like 4 or 5, and there are tools for that to generate color palettes online. Decide what you want to use and use that everywhere once you decide. The same is a typography system. It's one font that you use for your logo and maybe 2-3 font sizes for your website, not more. And the same, think about your brand voice. When we talk about brand voice, that means if you define your target audience, you will know what they are. You know, there might be more young people, then you need a younger language that you're talking to them, or they're older people, or more conservative people, or specific people in whatever direction, or diversified. You should define some kind of a brand voice that helps creating your brand. And last but not least, it's also recommended to develop a set of imagery. You know, that means use some images where you think that reflects your brand, that reflects your values, these kind of things. If you create that, really, that's not very complicated to do. There are a lot of online tools where you can generate that and create that. I can promise you it will immediately look nice, quote unquote, independent of where you put these things afterwards. So as I mentioned, color palette, you know, the key thing is that is all about consistency afterwards. If you have a logo, a website, maybe an online store, you have a retail store, you do advertisement, you have a social media presence, maybe even the uniforms for your staff and employees, if that applies to you, should be within these color palettes. I promise you, if you do that, it looks amazing, and you don't need a super expensive agency to actually reach that. You can think about that a little bit yourselves as well. The same goes in regard of typography. You know, typography sounds very complicated, but in the end is decide what font you want to use. And don't use 20 variations of that font once you actually decide for one. Use very few, less is more. That's very important. then also this will contribute to create a nice brand for you, and also use the same online and offline slash digital, depending on how your business is run. When you look about the name, you know, that's a lot of people underestimate as well. You know, in 2020, probably most of you are familiar what the domain name is. A lot of these domain names are already kind of blocked. They're being sold to you in thousands of Swiss francs or dollars, but you might want to find a new name or a word that reflects your personal business, maybe has a personal meaning for you. And they're nice tools. One that I usually recommend is Namecheck. So it's not Namecheck, so it misses the E and C. This is a super cool tool that actually not only looks up if your domain name is available, it also looks up if your Facebook profile or Facebook fan page, YouTube fan page, other things are actually available with the same name to help you driving consistency. Super important. And I think that's also part of the branding, but also part of the market research before you launch. So when you think about picking an e-commerce platform, this is where I'm going now a little bit more the enablement of that part. You know, I think there's kind of two different approaches that you can take in 2024 for launching and using technologies to enable your online business. Think about it like the Apple operating system that runs on your iPhone versus the Android operating system that runs on a Samsung or on a Google phone or on a Huawei or others. There are two different approaches. So iOS is more like a closed approach. You know, you can create apps, but it's very difficult to actually customize the system. But on the other side, they have a good app store with different apps. In Android is the same, but in Android you can literally change everything because it's open source. And both approaches have pros and cons. You know, when you, for example, first go into so-called software as a service or shared cloud-based e-commerce platforms, first of all, you have a very strong vendor lock-in. You're highly dependent on the platform because changes can only be made through some apps. And if at all, you might find out very quickly that your specific business case is not possible to be covered using this platform. Of course, there is no coding knowledge required. I mean, you can get started very quickly with a Shopify or with a Wix.com or with a Squarespace that also includes some e-commerce functionality. You don't need to know any requirements about web hosting. Of course, yeah, we'll talk about that a bit as well. They say that you don't need a technical team. I think this is a bit of blah blah, especially what Shopify is advertising that you need a developer on Shopify or a designer on Shopify. The reality is they're also building a partner program and they realize they need some more professional people to make their SMB customers successful. But again, you know, when you then look at the other part of the market, the Android, and I think this is where I'll have a bit of more personal flavor in the opinion, is that the number one in this market is obviously WordPress with their WooCommerce plugin. It's owned by the same company, but it's also fully open sourced. It's a huge community behind it. I'll talk about that in a second. And it's a so-called self-hosted and self-managed approach for e-commerce platforms. You know, you could consider that it's maybe 2% more complicated, but I will show you later today on how easy it is also with WordPress and WooCommerce. And there are obviously other options. There is Shopware, especially in the German-speaking market. There is Shopware, huge install base and many years on the market. Also interesting to look at. Magento, Magento has been acquired by Adobe. It's a huge system. It's very complicated to manage. And so this is rather for like very large scale companies, I would say, or with tens of thousands of products. It's maybe more like Magento, but it needs a different approach. And then there are some smaller guys like PrestaShop, OpenCart, XD Commerce, and so on. And I'll talk a little more on that right side of the things today, because I think it's more relevant also for Swiss companies and those companies who want to have a long-term solution that is scalable and customizable accordingly. As I said, I'm not paid by them because in the end it's free in the base version and it's open source. Yeah, so that also has an advantage. You know, when we talk about WordPress, WooCommerce, WordPress is currently about 35% of all websites running worldwide. This is coming from technology tracking companies like W3Tax or Beltwave.com. You can look it up. It's actually about 60% of the content management systems market, and they have an ecosystem with 55,000 or more plugins. You know, when you look at Shopify, they have maybe about 2,000 apps. So it's really a different world. When you then add WooCommerce on top of it, you have 40% of all shops today running on WooCommerce. It's 100% open source. You run it wherever you want. And there is a huge ecosystem on the WooCommerce plugin itself with more than 6,000 plugins. And I think what is also important when you talk about using technology is, according to Automatic, one of the company behind WordPress, WooCommerce, there are more than 1 million developers, designers, or agencies that know this technology. You know, if you work with one agency and they know WordPress and WooCommerce, I promise you, you will very quickly find someone else who understands this technology. They don't need to learn what the other agency did before. So if you need to switch to a new agency, WordPress and WooCommerce will be your best bet in 2020, that you will find someone who helps you. Also, when you, for example, have a problem and your agency is not responding, or your internal person is not responding, or on sick leave, you will find someone who will help you. So what to look further in an e-commerce platform? You know, a lot of e-commerce platforms, they do a little bit the same, but they have like some specifics that you need to look at. I mean, things like SEO friendliness, mobile friendliness / responsiveness. You know, a lot of people buy online through their phone or their tablet. It's kind of given. The same as product management, order management, return management, blah, 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 blah. This is all like very standard. I think what you should be considering specifically is security. There are multiple layers of security that you need to consider, but I will show you a little later how this can be done very, very easy. You will basically need to check if, for your specific business model, if you are operating in Switzerland, that you comply to the Swiss market maybe. If you then start operating in Germany, you might need to look into the German market requirements. There are data protection requirements, for example, GDPR or the Swiss data protection requirements on how you handle data. That should be a key part to look at with all these systems that you're going to use. And of course, what is also important, are there any plugins and connections for multi-channel integrations? I think the best bet for that is WordPress and WooCommerce for you, but I'll show you in the case study why I think this is the case. Just a few words on compliance and other such topics. You know, I'll share these slides so you don't have to read all this. I think there are two topics that you at least need to touch when you think about your e-commerce business. First is GDPR and data protection. GDPR means General Data Protection Regulation. For those of you not aware of it, it has been implemented by the EU. I think the final implementation and mandatory was since 2018. And in German, it's called Datenschutzgrundverordnung. It basically defines everything on how you should or should not work with privacy and private data of your customers. And super important to think about if your systems are actually compliant and if your business is compliant for that. The second part is obviously Pci Compliance. This is a standard that was created years ago already. I think initially it came from the US, but now it's an international standard. This is basically a standard on all different layers that you need to be compliant to when you store credit card data and other things that are critical in terms of payment. a lot of actually payment gateways are taking away the issue from you, but still for your shop, you should analyze, am I compliant to PCI with all my different levels on the infrastructure, because you might have problems. You might not just get hacked, you actually even might risk getting fines for that. So B2B, I mentioned this is a topic of today. I think, you know, B2b e-commerce was sometimes, some years ago, that was really limited to very large scale organizations. You had to buy a system from SAP or from Coupa or Ariba, and then you pay hundreds of thousands for your setup and selling and all these things. And this is much different in 2020. You know, when you are working with WooCommerce, and I'm going to show that to you later today. As I mentioned, I'm not paid by them. This is just a cool plugin that I found that also works for the Swiss market very well because it's from Germany. It's called B2B Market. It costs not too much. It's about 80 euros per year or so. Of course, you need to install it, maintain it, and all these things. What does also a cost? But it is relatively inexpensive to compared to the large enterprise solutions that were in the market in the past for actually driving B2B. You know, B2B also means then custom pricing depending on your B2B customers. It might be tier pricing, lots of other things. But this is a nice WooCommerce plugin that you just install, and I'll show it to you in a few minutes later, to actually run B2B e-commerce with and for your customers. And the other thing, you know, what you also need to check is how can I actually extend my business, you know, and I take the wine shop as an example. There is a plugin called WooCommerce Subscriptions, and if you don't have a wine subscription for your customers, you can just use the subscription module and actually launch wine subscriptions for your customers, just as an example. So this is an example of how you basically think ahead. Are there new business models, new ideas that they can use to launch my products online? So last but not least, a few words on managing your logistics and warehouse. You know, a lot of retail stores, especially if you have multiple retail stores or you have multiple construction places, think about a centralized warehouse. You know, today there are super interesting digitalized shipping providers where you can just connect with a plugin towards their system. Every order gets shipped within 2 days. And of course, the reference for that is Amazon, because they have the fulfillment by Amazon. And often you can easily just connect then that to your ERP system with the online store. It's super important that even though you use a central warehouse, is that you still connect your online store and the stock with your ERP, because you might also sell offline. And also when you sell offline, make sure you only put these products into the store offline that actually sell, and the rest you just put online and in your central warehouse. And you might actually use, then offer a combined experience that you can shop online and you can return the product in one of the stores. Hopefully not, but, or vice versa, you know, that you, that you can then mix and match to actually create a special customer experience when you look at such kind of shipping providers. So last but not least, I think your future, I think you might start with your own online store, but there's so many more opportunities when selling online in 2020, and there are modules for that where you can easily not just sell through your online store, you could also syndicate your product lists into Google Shopping. You know, Google Shopping is actually not the platform really. It's more like making sure that if people Google something in terms of product, that you have the right format in Google Shopping in this area and feed your products over there so that Google is showing up your products. The next one is Instagram. Yeah, Instagram is just an example. There are now plugins where you have a direct checkout experience in Instagram. Someone asked me if that is coming from Instagram itself. Yes and no. It's actually a module that you have in your online store, and the actual checkout happens in your online store, but Instagram is basically processing it for you through their platform. Especially it's interesting maybe for clothes or other rather visual products. Last but not least, I mentioned selling on Amazon. You know, Amazon is a multiple $100 billion business and platform today. I would even call it its own market. The Amazon US is obviously the biggest one. And then you have Amazon Germany, that is the second largest, but Amazon now is in Turkey, in France, in Spain, in many markets, and you can run that from one single interface. Just be aware, selling on Amazon is not as easy as it sounds. You need to think about their costs, think about the warehouse. Do you use Amazon warehouse or not? Not going in too many details today on that, but can be a huge opportunity for you on additional. And I think the biggest opportunity with Amazon in 2020 and beyond is Amazon B2B. You know, as I mentioned, brands are thinking that selling on Amazon is just to private customers. But you know, a friend of mine, he's selling like professional construction devices, you know, where he was thinking he saw sales on Amazon because then he will reach also private customers that are more the pros that will buy his products. And the result was he actually realized that small construction companies in other regions now buy his products on Amazon instead of from him. And that then brought him to the idea to use Amazon B2B, where you can have tiered pricing and custom quotes and many other things. And I think Amazon B2B is probably even a bigger opportunity for you of selling online compared to the B2C part of Amazon, just in addition and just for your multi-channel future. There are also additional tools to manage multi-channel. I got some questions about that in the last session. We can talk about it, but I didn't cover the related tools for that into that. But for example, there are WooCommerce plugins that cover that as well. So a few more words on the technology, because that leads me then to the case study, to the demo. You know, I think a lot of people talk about cloud computing, and a lot of people actually don't really know what it is. I always use this funny picture that says there is no cloud, there's just someone else's computer. You know, in the end, there are providers like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, DigitalOcean. They run global data centers everywhere that you can access very simply through a single interface from your home office, and you pay for what you use. And they also offer all the software. One of them I'm going to show you today, that you can use out of the box in a simple way to host wherever you want. You know, you may want to start in Switzerland, and then you say, okay, I need server in Switzerland, and you go for Google Cloud or Microsoft Cloud because they actually have servers in Switzerland. They're even FINMA compatible now. You can look it up online. They really comply, and they're not going to share your data because you manage it. And so I think understanding cloud, the basic cloud computing terms is super important when you talk about technology for digital transformation, as well as even for e-commerce specifically. You know, traditionally, you would have done everything on premise here, and managing all this is actually quite a hassle. It's actually very annoying, all these layers of technology that you need to manage. But then there are these principles of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. So when you look at Shopify, Wix, and these kind of large-scale cloud platforms, they manage everything, but it has the downside, you cannot change everything because they manage it. Yeah, it's a software as a service. When you somehow go in between, and I think that this is somewhere where we are going today, also with the demo and technology that we have, is that you still have a level of control, but that the underlying technology that is coming from the cloud, you don't need to manage. And again, also here, security and privacy are super important, but this doesn't mean you have to use a server that sits in your server room in your small and medium-sized business, or that it's a server specifically running in Switzerland, because there are many tools and technologies today that are super easy to use that handle that part for you, but you still have self-control, self-managed in the cloud. But it is a super important part, as we managed earlier. But how to decide, you know, I mean, in 2020, when you look for, let's say, we call it web hosting, or you want to run your WordPress and WooCommerce, because I have a bit more focus on that today, you are often being presented with a so-called shared server, you know, that you pay 10 Swiss francs per month, and then you're on the same machine like 999 other people. And that results in the fact that your website with your WordPress or WooCommerce with your shop is not performant. You know, I mean, I have seen television advertisement in Switzerland from small medium-sized businesses where I said, like, let me make a test. While the advertisement is running, I'm going to their website and I'm getting an error. You know, that means they probably spent $30,000 for the TV advertisement, or 30,000 Swiss francs for the TV advertisement. But then they spend 10 Swiss francs a month for the website and the hosting, you know, and that's just not it. You know, you need to have something more scalable. You know, these shared environments, they might be good for your blog, for your small local community. You, in German, it's called Verein, you know, where you have your local soccer club or whatever. That's fine to use these kind of offerings. But for e-commerce, you really need something that is at another level, you know. When you then compare it, you know, these lower level shared hosting accounts, they cost between 10 and 25 Swiss francs per month. But if you go cloud and you go with your own, let's say you start with your virtual machine, because that's for a lot of stores by far enough. You pay somewhere between 25 and 100 per month for the virtual server, including a software like Plesk that I'm going to use today. You can get this even in a Swiss data center, and you can even easily upscale to more complex infrastructures for high traffic sites. It has 2% more complexity. So if you don't have all the knowledge in-house or don't want to learn into it, I highly recommend to work with an agency or a managed service provider, not just the traditional web hosting companies, especially in the e-commerce space. You just need a little more in terms of security, performance, and all these kind of things. So I think cloud is the answer, but be careful on the different subsections of cloud to have the right solution for you. As I mentioned, WordPress, you get it in every cloud, in WooCommerce as well. And you know, when we talk about WordPress, this is now becoming a little more technical, but they do this intentionally to show it how easy it actually can be. You know, when you wanted to use WordPress and WooCommerce and all these things years ago, you had to use FTP, and then you upload the files and you create a database, and it's a very annoying experience. You know, it's very time consuming. Then you have to make it secure, and it's about 30 different factors that are implying your security. You need to keep it up to date in an automatic way. And then you create, maybe, I think in a 2020 environment, how you actually manage WordPress and WooCommerce is, if you do plugin updates or if you do major updates on your website, you don't do that in production. You actually create the so-called staging, meaning you clone your shop, you update the content, and then you sync it back into production. This is something, you know, that was only available to large enterprises years ago. Maybe even them didn't use it, but today this is also available for SMEs, and it's really easy. And you can even auto-update your WordPress and WooCommerce, and I'll show you how that works in a few minutes. So this is my only sales pitch here. So when you use Plesk as an environment on your server in the cloud, you can use a thing called WordPress Toolkit. You know, that's something where we invested over 5 years into WordPress management because it's highly complicated to automate that. But we made it that, you know, there is automatic smart updates that is copying away your shop, checking if it's working with artificial intelligence, that it doesn't break your website, and then syncing it back. You have the ability to do a manual staging, that you say, I want to have a staging and test some stuff there and then bring it back, or then delete it again, also possible. And also, of course, that you do one-click deployments, installations, automatic security. Super important, I think, in 2020. This doesn't have to be complicated. So, as I mentioned, this is a simple interface for those who are familiar with Plesk. That's something that we have invested, as I said, over 5 years. It's super reliable, stable. You know, Plesk exists actually since 20 years now. So, and for those who are using cPanel, that's also part of our group. This is going to be in the next 2-3 weeks. This is going to be equally available for cPanel as well, in all the same functionality. And obviously the security part, you know, you need to have a firewall. You need to be DDoS protected. You need SSL free or with extended validation and domain validation. I'm not going into too many details, but this is literally just all one click today. You don't even need to know how it works and what it is, because an advisor is telling you to do so that you are secure by default. And this is also ongoing, you know. I think security is a complicated thing when you look at it from a technical perspective, but it doesn't have to be. So before we go into the case study and a quick demo, I want to talk a little bit about selecting an agency. You know, as some aspects might be more 2-3% more complicated and very technology oriented and a lot of moving parts, you might actually consider working with an agency. And at the same time, I wanted to give some ideas if you have an agency to actually run your business in a proper way and be a trusted partner to small and medium-sized businesses. Because the problem is, for years, some agencies have ripped off their customers, have left them alone. And this is why maybe some small and medium-sized businesses were also reluctant to really go all in with digital transformation and e-commerce. But an agency can also help you if you find one that is really your trusted partner. So an agency is also often not doing just the website for you. You're obviously helping a small and medium-sized business to run the website and the e-commerce is only one part. Often agencies also have the ability to actually help you with social media, with other marketing things, probably helping to create your branding guideline. As I said, this doesn't have to be 20, 30,000 just for the branding. That's just a ripoff. But they can also help you more holistic, how you should create new content, how you are search engine optimized. Paid advertising is a very complicated topic sometimes because it's very expensive to make it right and not lose money. And an agency can also help you selecting the right hosting platforms or whatever you might need. You know, if it's really Shopify you want to use, then use Shopify. If you want to go to a more traditional hosting company, an agency can help setting that up for you. Or if you go hyperscale cloud like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, DigitalOcean, and one of our tools, you can do that as well, you know, and in the end, it depends on your requirements, but in the end, it needs to be fast, performant, secure, scalable, and you should be focusing on the tasks that are really providing value, and an agency can help you with that. Obviously, it has pros and cons, you know. For example, at Plesk and WebPros, we have more like an in-house agency model. You know, we have a very strategic chief marketing officer that runs a large team, and they're doing all these things. You know, we have dedicated people for SEO, for paid advertising, for social media, for design, but it has high costs, you know, and there's a long ramp-up time. It also has a higher risk if you're not sure if this is right for you, whereby an agency can actually offer that with lower costs to you. It allows you to scale faster, and the risk is maybe rather lower to medium in terms of what you want to achieve. So an important part is make sure the agency doesn't only charge for the time. You know, this is part of the ripoff that kind of happened for years, that agency were just trying to bank as many hours as possible, and at the end are not like result focused to actually make you as a small and medium-sized business successful. I think that has changed, and there are other ways, you know. Ideally, and this depends really on your business, an agency is also ready to share some of the risk with you, but on the other side then maybe gets a small part of the reward, and to build a long-term partnership. You know, I mean, if you're not ready to share the reward, maybe the agency will also not be ready to share the risk with you. So, but I think there are like performance agencies, as they're called today, that can help you with it and really be a long-term partner. And another interesting thing, this is coming from a more traditional model in the enterprise software and services space. You know, I'm a big fan of build, operate, transfer model. Meaning, if you work with an agency because you need faster scale, you need their knowledge, let them build that thing, but also ask them to help you learning yourselves into it, because digital transformation, it's something, not something someone else does for you. You have to learn yourselves as well. And an agency can train you on managing these, some of parts of these systems yourselves, because you shouldn't contact the agency all the time whenever there is a question. On the other side, once you learn something, how you manage all your products, and maybe you hired someone for digital marketing, they can then transfer that after some operations time to you. Meaning, maybe there's after 6 months or after 1 year, you learned a lot more of it. They will still have the maintenance fees for managing their environment. But I think there should be a model that they offer you, that you will have, as a small and medium-sized business, the ability to actually cancel at any time. And I ask every agency, this will create so much more trust for your SMB customer if you drive such kind of models instead of just banking hours, you know. And if anyone is interested, I have actually templates on how you productize such services in a successful way, that you are actually being considered a trusted advisor and a partner for small and medium-sized businesses, and not evil to them. And obviously, if you as an agency are executing in that way, or as an SMB use an agency in such way, you achieve a reasonable balance between price and value, because I think that's the most important part, being a trusted advisor and not just someone who rips me off. And yeah, now I'll move quickly into the case study and demo for a few minutes before we move into the questions. Just something that happened to me personally over the Easter weekend. I'm not using the name of the company because they're still working on it, and it's not launched yet. And I was just an advisor because an agency is now doing the execution. But I wanted to share with you some really interesting case study that I think, you know, even happens in 2020. You remember I talked about the wine shop. So a small wine shop in Zurich, in Switzerland, has 4 full-time employees, including the owner and his wife. And they do a few million Swiss francs revenue per year with around 300 products. They are selling in a small retail shop in the city center. Obviously, that retail shop is now closed, but 80% of his revenues are sold to restaurants in the B2B model. Also, these restaurants are currently closed. I mean, next week they're opening, we'll see. But most of these B2B customers, they have ordered via telephone, fax, or sometimes email. Very time consuming and very error prone. They have a website, but it looks like 1999. You know, I was actually surprised myself, but it seems I had multiple similar cases afterwards where I was thinking, it's 2020. Is this really the case? And the answer is yes, it's still the case. So what have we done? You know, I said, like, okay, what can we do? We will install a WordPress with a set of plugins. It's going to be automatically secured, and it's going to be up and running. I'll show you in a second on what we're going to do. So a new WordPress and WooCommerce based websites, taking over the existing data. I'm doing it based on an example, not based on there. I used plugins, WooCommerce for WordPress, B2B Market, WooCommerce subscriptions, Elementor Pro, the page builder, a caching plugin to have it higher performant, and it's hosted on the Plesk virtual machine on DigitalOcean in Frankfurt. We used Datatrons as a payment gateway, and we had 3 predefined wine shop templates. No need to reinvent the wheel, you know, and adjust that for them. The agency is now charging around 5K setup and about 5K per year, so it can be really simple and easy. So if I go quickly to my Plesk, you know, Plesk is a software that runs on any server. You find it on hosting companies, you find it in lots of places, and you remember that we had this WordPress Toolkit. So I have 2 domains here. One of them is actually an empty website. It's called Lucas.Barcelona. This is where I'm quickly going to install WordPress, and with already made. And because this takes some time afterwards, I'm jumping to the production installation of the shop that I already created earlier this week to show you how actually easy it is. So a key thing for those who are a little bit technical is, okay, I need to log in again. That was for security reasons because we already speak for over an hour, or I'm speaking for over an hour. So when we go to WordPress, think an important part that makes lives easier as well is a thing called presets or sets. You know, when you deploy, when you're an agency, for example, and you deploy new WordPress sites all the times again and again and again, it's very time consuming. So we created a thing called presets. So what I created here is I created a preset for B2b and B2C e-commerce for that specific session. It actually includes all these plugins that I mentioned earlier. So WooCommerce, Stripe Payment Gateway in my case, because it's a demo installation, Elementor, SEOpress, and a few other nice things. Even I uploaded the paid versions. I could also put a theme here, but I'll leave that for now. So when we do an installation, we see that I go back to my domain just to make it a little quicker, and whomever is interested in more details. So what we basically do is we are going to install WordPress here. What I'm going to do is my main shop 2. I select my plugin and theme preset that I set before, and all that I'm going to do is just clicking install. What it's basically doing in the background is that it downloads the latest WordPress from WordPress.org, the absolute latest version. It is creating the database, it's putting it on the website, it's securing it, and it's actually installing all these plugins and the theme that I have defined before. That takes a bit of time usually because it needs to really install all the plugins. It takes a few minutes, but I'm going to use my existing installation to show you what else it does. You know, for example, security, super important. So there is a set of measures that it's applying automatically. You don't need to understand what that does, you know, because at the end, what you're basically doing is you're just, for the rest of the things, if you want to secure them, you can say secure it, and it goes and it does all the best practices from the WordPress community, whatever you need. It enables these security best practices and applies them accordingly. It usually takes a few seconds, like now, and you're done. When we talk about security, it's also super important that you always keep things up to date. You remember, update, update, update. And this is the absolute base for security. If that is the core WordPress installation, if that is the plugins, these are the additional issues you might have in security if you don't update. So what it does is that you can actually here define that you update all minor or major updates for WordPress and plugins and themes. I'm now setting them to yes, because I take a bit of a risk myself, so it's a demo installation. If you think this is too risky, because it could break your installation, there is this tool called Smart Updates, as I mentioned earlier. This is using AI, is taking away a copy of your whole installation, tests it based on visual and other code changes, and is testing it if your website works after the update. If it does, it pushes the update into production. If it's not, it actually does not update and gives you a message about it that you have might be an issue that we will need to look at. And last but not least, as I mentioned, staging and cloning. You know, if you say it's risky to test all my new features on my WordPress on production, I can clone it in a separate environment with one click basically, and then do all the tests there, updates and plugins, and we're back. So once everything is installed, so you see here now the other website is installed, but I leave it there because on this one I did some additional configurations here. So when we look into the example site, I'm just going to here to the site. had to re-log in. We have a complete ready-made wine shop for whatever we need. I've set it to English today because we are in the English session. It includes example products. You know, this is what it really is, almost just an example out of the box. You know, it doesn't mean we have to reinvent the wheel or build a template that is from ground up that is tens of thousands of dollars. You know, but you have really possibilities that are really amazing. And if you're going to the back end, don't be afraid with all these buttons here. I've installed a lot of things, and if for your employees, you can actually use role and permission management, but you can manage your products here in an automated way or in a single click way. It's really easy. And what I also wanted to show is we have been using this plugin called B2B Market. You remember I have installed your B2B system. Let me just click away these things that want more things from you. So when you use B2B Market, you can then, for example, say you create different customer groups. You can use various additional functions that might be interesting. You know, your B2B customers might have different shipping and payments. You might actually do a registration for your B2B customers. You might have minimum and maximum order quantities, all these kind of nice things. Super easy to configure. And then you can directly say, okay, I'm configuring that for my customers. So just to go back to the final case study, the whole setup is done. We used an agency in that case because they didn't have in-house stuff to manage that or the knowledge for it. And it can be done with not so much costs. What also is going to happen at the moment is education in WordPress and WooCommerce, so they can manage it themselves. They have actually launched a wine subscription because there was no wine subscription before. That's one of my advices where I said, look, launch a wine subscription because that's kind of market standard. The time to prepare was about 12 hours. And the time to be implementing was also about 12 hours. And the model will be a build, operate, transfer. So, you know, almost survived Corona, you know, but for sure, I think they will survive the next pandemic if anyone is coming. They're selling more than before, and now they're investing in scaling the business through digital marketing. I think super important. And yeah, when I mentioned zero to digital transformation in 24 hours, probably not 24 hours like literally, but 24 working hours, but it's possible in 2020. And we can really do some great things. I always say the best way to predict the future is to create it by Peter Drucker. And having said that, I would then open for questions. Let me see what has been put as questions into the Zoom. Probably several. Just give me a second. Do we get the handout? Yes, we are. I send out a slide share. If you, let me just do this. I just put my LinkedIn in my in the chat. If you connect me in LinkedIn, I will be sharing with you the slides as well as the recording. Of course, and it will be on SlideShare. WordPress, WooCommerce is perfect. I agree. Not for everybody, but in many cases. It has to start fast up front, nice plugins. Yeah, complicated architecture, it might not be the best. Yeah, I know. Some people say that, but there are ways that where you could actually have a more complicated architecture as well. You just need a bit more advanced engineer to do it because you need more than one server. But it's definitely possible. We have done an auto-scaling WordPress architecture for Plesk as an example that is auto-scaling on Amazon Web Services. Yeah, it works, but I agree it's a bit more complicated architecture, but yeah. There are actually people, there's just the next comment, okay. There are people who run actually huge installations with WordPress and they work well and with WooCommerce. As I said, it's just architectural wise that you need to check, but it can definitely work. I trust by this one. Also for SAP is a connector available. Yes, that's also interesting. You know, I know a company when we talk about B2B, there are actually sometimes requirements that you need to do OC XML or such connections to a custom purchasing system. There is a company in the Netherlands that creates such kind of connectors at a quite reasonable price, where you can then, everyone who is like a larger scale company you are dealing with in B2B would be connecting to your WooCommerce catalog over that XML connection, and would be doing the orders in their own ordering system. That also exists. I have tested it myself. Okay, let's see. Show Instagram here. Not a big fan of Facebook plugins cost. I agree. I mean, open source doesn't automatically mean free. Super important. I mean, a lot of WordPress plugins and WooCommerce plugins have a cost. But on the other side, many of them actually also have open source versions to buy sometimes. And you are really flexible there. Many are free. It really depends. I mean, just because I'm saying open source is more flexible than, or self-hosted and self-managed than Shopify, it doesn't mean that it has no cost, you know, just to be clear. Old story. Good. SAP connector. What else do we have? The future is headless. Oh yes, that's a difficult one to say, but that's also technically a bit more advanced. Yeah, the same is for serverless. You know, I know people who implement WordPress just for the backend, and then they are using a bootstrapped based whatever kind of JavaScript framework in a front end that integrates with the backend. Can all be done, yeah, if you have the knowledge how to do it. I don't. I just know that it exists. Yeah, you need a developer, exactly. All usable as headless, developers, blah, blah, blah. WooCommerce, we talk more about WooCommerce and SAP. No point solution anymore. Perfect, full, yeah. I've heard that a WordPress website is easy to hack and not so safe. Is that true? Very good comment. This is the usual comment in terms of WordPress. You know, the thing is with WordPress, the most of them that are getting hacked, the first way it starts, they're not kept up to date. People are lazy to manage their WordPress instances. But sorry for the sales pitch, if you use something for Plesk, like Plesk, you have automatic updates active, or you use smart updates, and you have all your security measures, you have a firewall, you have a DDoS protection, you have a malware scanner. I can guarantee you, I have WordPress websites that I run since several years, and I've never got hacked. I'm knocking on wood here, but there are ways without complicated technique to actually make WordPress super secure. Just make sure you keep them up to date. You have a malware scanner, and it can tell you no chance to actually get hacked, or let's say smaller chance. There are some exceptions sometimes. I think what you also need to be very careful, don't just use any random plugin for WordPress. You check how many installations they have, the plugin directly showing that to you. Check if there is a reliable plugin vendor behind. Are they maintaining their plugins over a longer time? If you use bad plugins that are not maintained, I'm sorry if you're getting hacked, you know, I mean, because that also is an issue. And I can highly recommend to be careful there. Any other questions? We can actually also take questions by voice, just in case if someone doesn't want to write anymore. Yeah, if not, I think we are right on time. As I said, connect me on LinkedIn if you have further questions, if you have any requests. More than happy to try to help you. The session is going to be recorded. I'm going to share the slides with everybody connecting me on LinkedIn, because I'm going to do a LinkedIn post about it. I'm going to be putting it to YouTube, whatever you like, because there might be a lot of people that did not have the chance, especially in the English-speaking language zones. And otherwise, I remain with saying thank you everybody for attending this session. I hope it was helpful, and you stay safe. And thank you very much for your time. Talk soon. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.